Black Watch Television, exciting viewing for Black Americans.
So I just wanted to provide like some kind of basic foundational principles for everybody to begin to understand the reparations framework, kind of like why reparations are owed. And there's an extension to that, because people sometimes tend to believe that, oh my gosh, like this doesn't make any sense, that it doesn't make any sense necessarily that other people are not included in the justice claim. So I wanted to just kind of talk about that just a little bit, and give everybody an opportunity to, let me turn this up just a little bit for myself, give everybody an opportunity to kind of understand what we all understand. When I say what we all understand, those of us in the ADOS movement. So we see reparations as, and it's not what we see it. Reparations has always been it's a form of redress. So when people always say it's radical, reparations is so radical. Why is it radical? Why are you doing this? Why do you need something? Why is it a handout? No, it's not a handout. It's what we do all the time to make sure that certain communities that have been harmed are made whole. So this isn't like it is something that we haven't seen. It's not like something that hasn't happened. And I would also make the argument that for us, we are specific in terms of we have been sort of multi-generationally oppressed in a very specific kind of way. And because of that reason, we can't make up that wealth. So it's not like we're white people, this thing happened to us, but we're white. So, hey, we can go get it in a different period, or we can go get it now. Income doesn't make up for wealth, right? So wealth is passed down. It's what people are living off of. It's what people are anchored in this era. And if you don't have wealth, you're locked out of the American life. And I'm going to show some more statistics about that in just 1 second. So just to go through, I don't want to make this too complicated because I want to leave time if anybody has any questions. Part of what has always happened with the reparations conversation is there have been questions that either nobody was able to answer, or nobody answered sufficiently, or the people involved in the movement didn't take it seriously. So you have to be able to have a conversation about who gets reparations, why, how much. Those are very specific policy anchored conversations that you have to be able to ask, that you have to be able to answer sufficiently. And those are economic conversations as well as moral conversations. So a lot of times what we have seen is that people have been able to make, or have been willing to make, the moral conversation. But when you get to the next step of, okay, how do we do this? Nobody really wants to have that conversation. Nobody really wants to go and tell white folk and all the other folk, hey, this is how it has to happen. This is what it needs to look like. And this is how you close the racial wealth gap. And this is how you keep it closed. So that's where we come in. And you all know that we've been featured, even though we aren't in favor of HR 40 anymore, we were the ones who actually reignited this movement. If you look at 2019, that's where the mentions of reparations and went up. That was us. That was the ADOS movement, just to give everybody a backdrop. When we talk about slavery, we're talking about slavery building America. In 1860, the nearly 4 million American slaves were worth $305 billion, right? More than the railroads, more than the companies. What we're saying is that without slavery, there is no America. So when you say, so how do you say to a group of people, well, you're not owed reparations, when there would be no country, like there would be no America without us. There would be no star, there would be no flag. There would be no wealthiest country in the world without this unpaid labor. And what we have is not just unpaid labor. When you understand the context of it, it's unpaid labor and then the creation of a caste that allows us to be re-enslaved in generations to come, just in different ways. So in my view, slavery never really ended. It just took on other names, just like slavery by another name, convict leasing, mass incarceration, disenfranchisement. We're going to talk a little bit about redlining. Those sorts of things create a caste where you are always the group that eats the failure in the country. So you can say, well, slavery ended. Well, actually, in a lot of places, it didn't end when people said it ended, but that's not all that we're talking about. We're also having another conversation about this kind of mechanized capitalism, racial capitalism that tethered us, anchored us to the bottom. That's a conversation that we're having as well, and that's a part of this conversation. right? If you're talking about being what we're being worth in terms of the manufacturing and all the railroads, you have to pay us that. We can't just start from zero. That's not what we do. Now, we believe local reparations has its place, and we salute everything that's happening there. But part of the responsibility of all local reparations programs, we believe, is to pressure the federal government to get involved and do its due. One of the things I would love to see a lot of different places do as well is conduct studies and talk about what was your state's particular participation in the oppression of slaves and ADOS. What role did they play? Almost as if we're talking about a prosecution. What role was played by your state, your municipality? That all has to happen as well, because we are really prosecuting this government. This is a condemnation of a historic wrong that was never righted in this country. And that's what we're talking about. So we all know this part right here about general, about the promise, right, of return to land, 40 acres and a mule. And it never happened. It never happened. So if you hear people saying, well, it's too late now, we're past that now, we gotta just move on. Wait a minute, wait. If you wrong me at any point, that's why we don't have a statute of limitations on murder. If you wrong me at any point, it's not my fault as the victim that you refuse to pay. Yes, you should have given 40 acres and a mule. And yes, you should have put policies in place to maintain that and to bring to heel Confederates who were aiming to disenfranchise us. Yes, all of that should have happened. But because that didn't happen, we still live the consequence of that. And one of the things that we don't really talk about nearly enough is how the consequence of that is alive today. So you don't live a life where when a slave dies, that life is over with. Where when a sharecropper dies, that life is over with. When somebody who didn't get a home or got their house appraised wrong, when that's over with, when their life is over with, that's over with. No, it's not over with, because they pass all of that down to you. So if they don't have it, like our people don't have it, what they do is they pass down an inheritance of negatives. Not because of anything they've done wrong, but because of what our country did wrong. See, everybody's passing down an accumulation. And what we were robbed of in our inheritance is that accumulation. We were supposed to be able to accumulate and then pass that down. They have stolen that. And now we don't have anything to be anchored in this bountiful American soil. And they're saying, get it how you live. And we got it and you took it. And you have to give it back, because there is an inherited experience that we live that is because of that robbery. That inherited experience is still here. That inherited experience of plunder, we still live that. So if there's one thing I would want people to walk away with and to understand, is that not only was real slavery not a long time ago, but it's also true. It's just as true that the way in which that oppression was baked into to the economy of America, it still builds a disenfranchisement for us. That's what happens. And it wasn't a long time ago. Black people were enslaved as recently as 1963. I met about 20 people, all who worked for the Waterford Plantation in St. Charles Parish, Louisiana, Harold told Vice. They told me they had worked the fields most of their lives. One way or another, they had become indebted to the plantation's owner and were not allowed to leave the property. This is in 1963. So even in that context, slavery was not a long time ago. Slavery was not a long time ago, and its effects never left. So you say, why? Well, you had slavery. You had Jim Crow. You had a multitude of legal disenfranchisements. So it wasn't just the KKK. It wasn't just the white mobs. It was what the white mobs enforced and that government allowed to remain and become law. We talk about redlining, right? I'm not going to get into it because I know you all know what redlining is. But those areas that are red, redlining is just Negroes. And we still have that today when we talk about appraisals. The only reason your house, you can have the exact same house with similar amenities in an ADOS neighborhood, and you could have a exact same house in a white community with similar amenities in a white neighborhood, and the white house will be worth more with the white people only because it has white people in it and white people in the neighborhood, and one has ADOS people in it and ADOS people in the neighborhood. That's it. So we are a contagion to wealth just because of who we are, and that is a consequence, right? That is a consequence of America. That is a consequence of America's decision. This is a decision to create a racialized caste, because in capitalism, somebody has to be on the bottom. There's somebody at the ultra wealthy, upper middle class, middle, lower middle, lower class, poor, extreme poor. We are extreme poverty. We're largely wealthless working class people. And that is designed that way because you have to put the toxins in somebody's neighborhood. You have to put all of the stuff that nobody wants in somebody's neighborhood. You know, somebody has to be willing to get cancer, like Cancer Alley. All of those things have to be. So the capitalism demands that somebody be at the bottom. And in this country, this racialized economy has decided that who is going to be at the bottom is going to be ADOS. It's going to be the descendants of slavery. That is not something that happened a long time ago. We're talking about now. We saw a recent study, this is older, about what was it, the McDonald's? All of these companies that are still using what amounts to slave labor. So we went from convict leasing to mass incarceration. When people talk about, it's amazing to me when people talk about they want to see, I love the Black family. Well, somehow you seem to have allowed or been okay with ADOS men being locked up in cages for drug charges and for mass incarceration for them to work and not get any money because they're working. Companies are using their labor, but they're not getting any money. That sounds like slavery. So once again, we talk about slavery was a long time ago. I don't understand what anybody's talking about. It's still happening. What do you see that white man on that horse? This is post-civil rights movement. So Washington, because none of this, because the hierarchy never changed. See, when you talk about getting wealth, yes, we're owed that wealth. And yes, we're owed that redress. But that's not just what we're talking about. What we're talking about is changing the hierarchy of America, because you have to make ADOS more powerful to where they cannot do that. Police are not paid to protect you. That's not what they do. The Supreme Court decided that they don't have a responsibility or obligation to protect. They protect wealth. And our wealth position has to be changed. You can't just be wealthless and be doing what we're doing, right? So that becomes part of the conversation that we're having, right? So let me go to the next slide really quickly. So according to the 1960 census, the immigrant percentage of the population was to the right of the decimal point. And I'm going to go to that chart really quickly as well, because I want to just get this, because a lot of people feel when we have this conversation, there is this overriding kind of thought that ADOS is being discriminatory, right? So we are being discriminatory to Black immigrants because we are not including them in our justice claim. And here's what I would say to that. The first thing I would say to that is they are included in our Black agenda, right? Because we have an inherited experience and we have a lived experience. So a Black immigrant coming to this country may have a lived experience of voluntarily immigrating to America and experiencing discrimination. That means what you need is anti-discrimination policy that protect you against being discriminated against in the workplace, by and et cetera, et cetera. That's a lived experience, but we have to take apart the lived experience, right? And the inherited experience. What we as ADOS live through and deal with is an inherited experience, multi-generational of oppression. Most Black immigrants came here post 1965. Why? Because the Immigration Act of 1965. So they were not here. To the right of the decimal points means they nearly didn't exist. It's nominal. It's a very small number. So if we're talking about reparations for slavery, sharecropping, all of that stuff, you were not here to experience that. And You voluntarily came here. When you voluntarily come to a country, that means your life is made better, or you wouldn't come here in the first place, right? So we didn't voluntarily come here. We were brought here in chains. So that is our ancestors' work. That is a very different, and we have to acknowledge that that experience is very different. The experience of voluntarily coming to this country, right, and having been brought here and used to build the wealthiest country in the world, then oppressed, the Red Summer 1919, sharecropping, the KKK, plundering, stealing land, the Great Land Plunder. What we're saying is Black immigrants did not experience that. And everything that we are owed is anchored in slavery and everything that came out of it. Slavery is the origin story. So it really doesn't make much sense for anybody else to be included in that story, right? We don't do that for anybody else. And the Supreme Court has made it very clear that what they're interested in is a specific harmed group. It's going to be hard to get it through a conservative court anyway. But what they're saying is hard is not impossible. And you have to prove a harmed group. If you go and read the affirmative action decision, they even say, listen, an elite Nigerian is very different than a descendant of slavery in rural Alabama. And they're right. They share phenotype, but they do not share the same experience. And the Nigerian who came here and is elite can go home. We are home. And we have built this country and we have nothing to show for it. And so, except for our wealthlessness. And so what we're saying is, we don't dislike you. That's not the case. What we're saying is specifically that we have to carve out a specific harm group. And that harm group is not based on melanin. You can find there was an Indian American a few years back who was paralyzed by a police officer. Just because they were treated bad by a police officer does not make that person part of our harmed group. That's not what that is. And so you have to be very specific if you want this thing to go through the courts. But even before you get to the courts, it would never make sense for melanin to be or kinky hair to be the tie that binds. You have to have the same kind of harm that you experience multi-generation. That harm goes back and originates in slavery. And that's what we try to get people to understand. This is just a little bit more of how we get to the number, which is 19 to 20 trillion as a down payment. That's not the full amount. We're talking about the down payment amount, right? Because you also have to work to keep that, because the one thing I always say, it takes more time to heal a wound than it takes to inflict a wound. If somebody walks up to you right now and slashes you with a knife, right? Takes seconds to slice somebody with a knife. Takes seconds to shoot somebody. Takes a long time to heal. And so you're looking at 400 years of oppression. What that means, though, is that it's probably going to take more than 400 years to heal, right? So you're talking about a multi-generational project, not just one payment. We're talking about a project that goes well into the future of America. So and part of how we do this is looking at the enslaved population, hours worked, wage, interest. Now that doesn't even we're not even getting into yet Jim Crow or everything that came out of slavery. That's why I said this is a down payment. This part is for slavery and not the accrued disadvantage. Now, reparations absolutely does benefit America, right? If the gaps were closed today, 5 trillion can be added to the U.S. domestic product over 5 years. That's absolutely true. And that was economist Dana Peterson of Citigroup who said that. Absolutely true. And we have to talk about the benefit to America. That is absolutely, absolutely true. But the other question that we have to ask Americans, no matter who you are, I don't care whether you are a white person, whether you're a person who immigrated here, or you have parents or grandparents who immigrated here, what kind of America do you want to live in? Do you want to live in an America where you move from hostility to harmony? Like, do you want to put all that behind you? And how much are you willing to pay to do that? How much are you really willing to pay to see justice and living in a country where we really are all the same? Or do you really want to live with this racial caste? That's the question, because it's really a lineage wealth gap as opposed to a racial wealth gap. But that is the question that we're trying to ask and answer when we go out and we reach out to people. When we talk about defining the harm, is one thing I just said a second ago as well. Almost 6 in 10 black foreign-born people in the United States, 58% immigrated to the U.S. in 2000 or later, right? So if you came here in 2000, okay, this is according to the Pew Research analysis of 2019, the American Community Survey. If you came here in 2000, how are you entitled to the same thing as somebody whose roots go back to slavery and all of the disadvantage from 1619 to 2024? That is the question that we have to ask ourselves. And when you're honest about that, it becomes clear that the harmed group are the descendants of American chattel slavery in this country. And when you look at wealth, we've all talked about this. Median household wealth, 25 to 40-year-olds. We don't have enough to live, right? We don't have enough to really be here. And so what we're asking for is not a handout. What we're asking for is not a gift. What we're asking for is for this country to finally pay what it owes, right? Median household net worth by race and employment status. Now look at full-time, right? Full-time. Look at black versus white and full-time. Look at out of labor. So people say, well, you got to go to work. No, we go to work. We just don't make the money. We don't have the wealth because the wealth is being passed down. The money is income. And even with income, we don't match up, right? America has decided that we're a throwaway group. You see the same thing throughout. Black workers are overrepresented in many of the lowest wage jobs. Why? Because America has decided, listen, policies decide, companies decide who the winners and losers are. And America has decided to the extent that we are here, we are going to be the losers. That's the trick of it all, is to convince us that we decided to lose, that we made the wrong decisions. No, we didn't. America made policy decisions, right, about how this country would be built. And they decided that it would be built on top of us. That's what they decided. They decided that we would be kind of like the soil. We would be a harvest group. And out of this group, everybody, whether you're talking about the Immigration Act of 1965, whether you talk about the LGBTQ community, whether you talk about women, they decided that everybody else would get something, right, from this group. We would fight for something and it would be spread out amongst everybody. And so we became this harvest group. You can plant a seed in us and it will grow for you, but nothing's going to grow for the dirt. And that's who they've made us into. It's not our fault, but life is whatever life is. And when you see a group this on the bottom, like understand Hispanic comes out and peaks above us. We're talking about a lot of people who haven't even been here nearly as long as we have. We have this. When you see a flat line, that means somebody's dying. This flat line means a group is dying. In the Carnell report in the 1960s, they said, listen, if you don't have some type of intervention for these people, they're not going to make it. The government has to have a serious intervention, and they decided not to. Nixon came along too and decided he was going to tell us to go get some black business and not give us any capital, and we ran with it. And so now is the time to understand that that flat line actually means something, and what it means is pretty awful. They say go to school. We've been given a bunch of lines. We just got to get an education, and you can be anybody. You can be anybody. No. Look at white versus black with an education. Post college. College, we still don't get the income, and we're still not inheriting the wealth. So that doesn't work. These are all myths around closing the lineage wealth gap. It won't work. What we find, even look at those arrests, right? What we find is that, and anybody who tells you any different than this is just lying to you. The only way to close the lineage wealth gap is through reparations. It doesn't come through work. It doesn't come through a good job. It doesn't come through going to college. It doesn't come through entertainment. It doesn't come through any of that. By every measure, listen, the only way you find a group that is down by every measure is if it is intentional. That's the only way. You're never going to find a group by every metric. Even by unaliving themselves, they are down. It's not going to happen unless it is orchestrated by your government. And that's what we find. And that's where we are. Every metric, wealth, prison, health, income, everything. That's just what it is. So I hope I gave everybody a good enough kind of overview of where we are. And we could, if you all like, move into a Q&A space. But I hope everybody gave everybody an overview of what we're thinking about in terms of ADOS and the ADOS Advocacy Foundation in terms of reparations.
Can you hear us, Yvette?
I can hear you.
Okay.
I can hear you. Is somebody else talking?
Hello, Yvette. I got a couple of questions for you. One is, who has the best scholarship? You know, against or contemporary speaking. Who would you recommend providing some good research? And another is, can you kind of reflect a little bit about how this movement of reparations, or maybe even double back, how perhaps, maybe the last policy they tried to address slavery fell short, the affirmative action. So talk about how that fell short.
Oh, I only heard the last part about affirmative action, just FYI.
She said how it fell. If you could talk about how it fell short.
Yeah, I heard that part. I think she had an initial question. I didn't hear the earlier question.
The earlier question was, what scholars would you recommend providing some good research?
Well, that's another problem. There aren't a lot of them, right? I have been in conversation, and I don't want to put his name out there now because we have agreed that I wouldn't publicly, because sometimes when you start talking about the work we do, you have a problem getting published. But this person that I was having a conversation with was talking about going further than talking about what's old and doing kind of specific simulations about how to do it. Right, because he was saying that no matter what because one of the things that I always say is, oh, you all have bad habits, you spend too much or whatever. That's actually not true. We actually edge out white people saving if you adjust for income. But what he was saying is that even if that is true, there's a way to adjust for it in terms of how you distribute reparations, right? So I would like to see more of those people doing work, not just about what is old. We know what's old. I want to go past that now to, okay, what does reparations look like? Give me 10 different simulations. And that's what he was working on. Give me simulations about if we pay out this much in this many years, how much does it close? Okay, if we pay out, what does it look like if we paid out in 20 years versus 100 years versus having something for the kids when they come too? Because I kind of cringe sometimes when I think that something just we're over. Like I say, 20 trillion is a down payment. Okay, having something for them as well. How do those different models look? Right. And can we agree on what is probably the best model for closing that gap and maintaining that closure, that lineage wealth gap? So they are out there. I'm in conversation with them, but I don't see a lot in terms of the work that's already there. I'm not saying the work that's already there is not good. That work did a good job in telling us what the debt was, right? In terms of how much we were owed and why. We get that though. Now comes the issue of what does a serious policy look like in terms of closing that gap? That's what I'm looking to now in terms of academia. Give me the simulations that show, give me what I can choose from, my suite of things to recommend to politicians for closing this gap, right? So that's what I'm looking for. In terms of, and those are the conversations I'm having. In terms of affirmative action, the problem was, and it wasn't even supposed to be for women. Women got slipped into affirmative action late in the game, right? It was like a poison pill that got through. You're never going to have a good policy if it's not specific. And that's why we went to the OMB and the White House Office of Management and Budget, and we asked for a specific designation. We asked for an ADOS specific designation for us so we can begin to specify ourselves as the harmed group. Because I don't care whether you're Native Americans, whatever group you are, right? Native Americans are very specific. They exclude a lot of people in terms of how they decide who is part of what tribe. To a certain, and I disagree with everything they're doing with the freedmen, because they have had their own kind of Jim Crow on some of their on some of their reservations, right? That we don't really talk about it as much as we should have. Now I think they're working on it. But you have to have specificity. You can't say that something is just for minorities, or it's just for disadvantaged people, or it's just for people of color. You have to be able to say, this is the group, this is American descendants of slavery, the institution, and they experience a specific harm, and whatever resources come are going to go to that specific group of people. Anytime you lack specificity and there's a pot of money, everybody's going to come and get that pot of money. Everybody's going to run and get that pot of money. And that's part of how the Hispanics came to be. If you read Making Hispanics, part of the reason they did that is that they realized post-civil rights, because pre-civil rights, they define themselves as white. Post-civil rights, they realized these Negroes are going to go get a bunch of money, and we have to be able to get a bunch of money. Part of that is to say that we are Hispanic, and they did a whole campaign around it, and we're brown just like they're black, and we experience discrimination the same way they do, because there's a competition for money. So the harm has to be around lineage and not race. That's the specificity. It's about a group of people who come from a very specific lineage, not just black people, but a group of people who come out of slavery into into Reconstruction and sharecropping and all of that harm. This is the group of people who are owed.
Do we have another question? Yelper, you could come up close too.
Mm-hmm.
Okay. And I understand and agree with all you say, but our people, I'm going to say our people, they're voting and we want things to change, but we can't even put the right people in office to make those changes. What suggestions do you have?
Well, I think I wouldn't want to put the cart before the horse, right? If you want to have people put the right people in office, I think the best thing to do is build a movement around what your agenda is, right? So when I look at the change that's happened in this country, a lot of what I see, whether it's the labor movement, whether it's the civil rights movement, I see a movement that pressured people, because I don't really care. See, this is what we kind of depart ways. I don't care who the people are in office, because to me, most politicians are prostitutes, right? If you pressure them to do a certain thing, they will do a certain thing. I don't see these people, most of these people, I'm not saying they're no good politicians. I'm not saying that. But most of these people, if they are pressured to do a certain thing, they will do that thing, right? It's not the case that we have to go and find these moral people to put in office. You're probably not going to find them. Some of the people who want to be politicians for the worst reasons, right? So I'm not, and we have a lot of people who came into politics for all the right reasons and became part of the machine. That's usually how it works. So politicians respond to pressure and not applause. So my thing is, we have to build a movement that's big enough to pressure them into doing what we need them to do. So right now, you have a bunch of people going around and saying, we just have to save our democracy, right? We can't worry about nothing else. We can't worry about your black agenda. We can't worry about your reparations. We can't worry about your dirty water. We can't worry about nothing you got going on, except for the fact we got to save democracy. And the problem is, there's not a movement big enough yet to say, no, that's not what we're doing. We're not doing that. We're not doing this with you. If you don't meet our needs and give us substantive policy proposals for reparations and our black agenda, give us a timeline, talk about how much we're gonna get in housing, all of that stuff. If you can't do that, then we don't owe you our vote. We don't have that right now. We just have a bunch of talking heads running around and saying we have to save democracy, not understanding that if we still have to fight for a Voting Rights Act, how real is democracy in our lives anyway? So I view it differently. I don't count on politicians to naturally want to do the right thing and getting the right people in office, even if we have good people. The machine is the machine. I view it as having a movement big enough to kind of force these people to bend, right? And maintaining that movement. And that's why I transitioned from just kind of giving content and providing a framework for people to understand lineage and wealth and politics, to you have to build it out into a movement. And that's what the ADOS movement is about, building something that's big enough to be a force for these politicians to reckon with.
And thank you for your great answers. Ms. Carnell, do we have any other questions? Oh, Mr. McCoy, did you have one? Or? Go ahead.
Two other things. One is, can you know, because part of this issue too is about educating between, you know, your position when you're advocating or ADOS advocacy is advocating and others in this space like Cobra or Tariq Nasheed. So what's really the distinction? And then secondly, what do you think it's significant now that human advance disaggregating our data or disaggregating data so we can really clearly see, you know, where, you know, African Americans who are descendants of slavery are really falling on the spectrum?
Well, let me try to. I think I heard it broke up a little bit, but in terms of, there's no way to see the harm if you don't disaggregate the data. So we have a color of wealth report in Miami. We have a color of wealth report in LA that breaks up different immigrant groups from Nigerians and descendants of slavery, right? And you see that we're on the bottom of those, right? So in I think it's Boston, we only have, what's it, Miami? We only have like $8 in wealth, right? Boston. So when you understand that we're on the bottom of Black immigrants too, you realize that we can't be a part of that number because nobody can really see our harm as long as we are in those numbers. Nobody can see the harm if we are in those numbers. So you have to take us out. And the funniest thing is we don't have a problem disaggregating other groups. Other groups have won this. We saw Mina get some stuff. We saw other groups and we need that, because what has been happening too is that you have other elite Black immigrant groups who mask our failure, right? So they make us look like we're not failing as hard as we are because they have a different background and they have more wealth. So that's the part, that's why disaggregation is so important. Now, what they said about disaggregation too, they said we're not going to do it right now. One, because the Urban League came out and said, you know, you can't listen to ADOS. I don't know what that has to do with anything. And they were not in favor of it. The Urban Institute came out and said they were okay. They might be okay with doing it, but they needed to be led by somebody else. So everybody's trying to cut the grassroots movement out of the room. That's basically the conversation that they're having now. But the OMB said, we understand that this needs to be our next place to study. Obviously, because of we trained over 1,000 people. So, and that's in addition to the conversation that we've been having, people that just did it on their own and didn't come to any of the trainings. What we have done, what we did there, and the reason we did it is because you have to have that, you have to have those numbers. So if you say you're a specific harm group, prove it. And the OMB said we need to look into this. Obviously, there's a swell of support around this, and this is going to be our next priority. So it's absolutely not over. Now, we also recently just started another affiliated organization. I am not the director there, but we have two co-directors who are both PhDs, and they are going to be at the Reparations Summit. They are co-directors of the ADOS Research Institute, and part of their job, in terms of what you talk about with these other people, with these academics, the previous question, part of their job is to go out, reach out to these people and write papers that give the OMB what they want. The OMB said we need more studies, we need more research. Okay, now we put together a research institute with the co-directors of PhDs and everybody else. There's one with a master's and another PhD, and their job now is to provide them with what they need going forward in terms of that research. Now, in terms of NCOBRA, part of my problem with NCOBRA is it's a Pan-Africanist group. I have no problem with people being whatever they want to be, but the Supreme Court said very clearly that you have to have some type of specificity. We're not going down the road of we all blackity blackity black. They said that. I didn't say it. They didn't say blackity blackity black, but they said that part. They were very clear that you can't define a harm group just by race. The second thing is, N'COBRA has been around since either the 1980s, 90s, sometime around there, a very long time. The last time I talked to someone from N'COBRA, they said we've been around 30 years. Well, you know, if I had been around 30 years and another group came in and was doing good work, I think I would try to say, you know what, you all are doing something. You all are doing it based on lineage. We had 20 years to do it based on pan-ethnicity, Africa, and it didn't work. But the second thing is, the third thing, I guess, is Africa isn't even united. So I don't understand why the responsibility is on us to be more united than people are on the continent. Like, if they are not united as 54 countries, how then are we supposed to be united to do something that includes them a world away? And when the Congo is trying to get reparations from Belgium, right, they aren't including me. And right, they're right not to include me. I don't have a claim in the Congo, right? So my problem is, it has become this thing where Pan-Africanism has become more of a religion than a political project. And they don't have any proof of concept, meaning if you talk to them, they will talk to you about my brother and I love my brother, but they won't have a plan for how to get reparations, as opposed to just having this sort of cathartic, but the white man. No, that's not what we're talking about. Ron Daniels himself, who is a NARC, said that HR 40 was symbolic. I'm not interested in symbolic politics at all. I'm interested in politics that can do something, that can improve the material quality of life of my people. I'm not interested in something that's symbolic. I'm not interested in any of that other stuff. People can do whatever they want to. I'm not interested in wearing dashikis, none of that. Everybody can dress how they want to dress, but you can't allow that to bleed into very serious political spaces. And I think that's what's happened. And I think the world has moved past that, and it's taking them time to realize that. And I even, I had a conversation with somebody from N'COBRA, and he said to me, he said, Yvette, what you don't understand is, how would you feel if somebody planted the seed and you came and ran off with the fruit? I say, see, I can tell by your analogy, you don't understand what happened. That is not what happened. Your seed is a Pan-Africanist seed where we're all Africans, and that's not ours was not built on that. The seed we planted was a seed that was about lineage, the cost of being a descendant of slavery. It was a seed about wealth. When people understand that by 2053, we're going to be wealthless, so there has to be an urgency. We planted a very different seed. Our seed is our seed. Your seed is your seed. And the fact that it didn't grow, and we took it, it didn't grow. And we planted a different seed, and that seed is growing. No shade to them, but that's just what happened. So when you say, what about N'COBRA or whatever, I would ask about what is their body of work. After 3 decades or so, you should have some wins. I'm not saying you should have a lot. You've gotten way more money and way more accolades and way more conversations and way more meetings with Congress people than I have. And I just don't see a proof of concept. And that's because it doesn't make any sense for us to be trying to get reparations for ourselves and 54 countries in Africa. That doesn't make any sense. That's not how a justice claim works. A justice claim works the same way that if you were to go to court tomorrow and say I was working for this company and I breathed in cancer producing carcinogens into my lungs and they gave me cancer and I have a case. That is your case. And anybody else who experienced that harm with you, that's their case. That person got cancer. That person got skin disease or whatever. You are all talking about a specific harm from a specific company. Everybody who works in manufacturing can't show up to the court and say, I have a case too. That's not how it works. That's not how we define harm. And I really believe that a lot of these organizations delayed the reparations movement by just not understanding how you define a harmed group.
Thank you for your answer. Are there any more questions? We got Lynn. Lynn works with Minnesota Council of Churches and Restorative Actions and other groups.
Two states, California and New York, are undertaking work as reparations commission. What's your analysis of New York and California's reparation commission work?
Well, a lot of the people who went to California were actually former ADOS people. They were people who were in the movement and decided to go do something else under different names, right? So, I think you have to be careful to do it right and not to rush, right? So one of the dangers and I'm supportive of different kinds of local reparations framework if done right. But one of the dangers that you don't want to happen too is to have, like, let's say somebody gives a few thousand here, a few, and suddenly the right wing is saying, we've already paid reparations, we did it locally, right? Then you have, where is it, Ashford, where they're doing people of color or poor people, the most disadvantaged. Well, it's a majority white city. So I don't see that there will be much benefit in California. And I don't understand why. It's very interesting because they could have gone for something different. In California, there are Native American tribes that actually get free education, free college, right? So also you add into that, you could have said, listen, we want the same thing the Native Americans get. They get free college in California. I don't know if it's all of the tribes, but some of the tribes get free college, right? Like, there has to be some kind of but my main thing is, I think New York hasn't gone far enough. And I've been in conversation with Senator Sanders. What happens a lot of times though is that NARC and people like Ron Daniels have more of a relationship with these politicians, especially the older politicians. They have relationships, so he's going to bring him in. Politicians love the cameras, but I had conversations with him too about how this was supposed to go. So we will see whether or not that comes to fruition. I don't know yet. I don't think California did what it needed to do, partly because when it becomes apparent, right, that you're not going to get to meet with the governor and they're not going to really give you what they were supposed to give you, or they're not going to really even take this seriously, you have to kind of drop the gauntlet down on them, right? Like, this isn't going very well. And I think part of the reason that they believed that it was going to go different, and part of the reason Shirley Weber believed what she believed, is because the co-founder of the ADOS movement, Antonio Moore, was the one who called in to in support of that commission, right? So when he called in, he had a bunch of other ADOS people called in. So they believed that there was a grassroots movement in California. Well, there was a grassroots ADOS movement, but the people who were doing the work in California were not had started to do their own thing. And so once politicians see that you don't have a movement, they walk away, right? Because they respond to pressure, not applause. I talked to reporters from CNN, I talked to reporters from the AP about this, and they all said to me when they called me just to kind of get my opinion about it, they said, listen, Yvette, nobody's here. They said, we're going to these town halls and all these different things, and nobody's there. And for me, it's not a condemnation of the people who were there trying to do the work. I'm not condemning them, but you have to learn from everything, right? And so what I learned from that is you got to have the movement. You got to have the people in place. Everybody, including those reporters, were watching to see how many people showed up. How big is this thing? And if you can't get people to show up and show out and let people know that, like, this is something that we are serious about, you're going to have a lot of problems. And I don't know, it's too early for me to see in New York whether they have a lot of problems. I don't know. I think, Ron Daniels is in some other kind of, trouble with Republicans or whatever. It was always going to be some kind of way. But I think you have to have a movement. I think too many people have decided that, and that's why I appreciate Trey Hearn for inviting me here, because you have to invite the movements in to participate, because the movements have the numbers. You can't have a number as an individual. You don't scare a politician as one person. It's a collective.
Thank you for these great answers. We have any more questions? I just want to say one good thing about New York is the governor put $5 million into that commission.
Oh, I heard. Yeah. That's good. Like, a lot of them didn't get any money or got really underfunded, right?
Exactly. And that was, so that's that happened. That shows us a level of
initially she wasn't going to put any money in at first. You remember that? That's how I started. Initially, that was the talk. So yeah, it's good that because that's how you have to do it. You have to pay the people. You have to pay the researchers to come in. All of that.
Yep, and I think that kind of goes back to what you're talking about the pressure and having, just people on the ground doing the work. We are going to be having in August. We're hoping we can get Yvette up here for we're gonna have another conference, and some of the people in this room were involved, and we'd like you guys to be back involved in that again. Are there any more questions?
Oh, that's gonna be great.
Yvette, you got any closing words for us?
No, I just appreciate everybody. And if you're gonna do the conference in August, I would love to come out. I appreciate that. I would love to answer these questions in public because I'm sure people have some more. So,
And if you want to make an announcement once more time about the conference you have in October and where it's going to be at.
October 3rd through 5th, we will be in New Orleans. And this is also an olive branch to people who may disagree with us, right? What I want people to do is, regardless of how you feel, I want you to come and I want us to hash it out. And I think we ought to be able to figure out something that we agree with, right? Like even if you disagree with 80% of what I say or 80% of my Black agenda or reparations framework, what I want to be able to do is, okay, let's work on the 20%. Let's work on the 20%. We have Carnell West, we have Nina Turner, we have a lot of great people coming out there. And I look forward to everybody coming out. And if you haven't joined yet, you can go to joinados.com as well.
Thank you so much. And I'll be in touch with you this week to start organizing for August.
All right. Appreciate you, fam. Thanks, everybody.
Thank you.
Black Watch Television. Exciting viewing for Black Americans.